I know, right? That's what I was doing. I'd like to call this meeting of the Farmington School Board to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks everyone for being here this evening. Thanks for our representatives from the Dakota County. We've got an agenda before us. I need a motion to pass the agenda, or if there's any other items that need to be brought forward. Are there any other items to bring forward to the agenda at this time? Nope. Seeing none, can I get a motion to pass the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Carrero, second by Doyle. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. First item on the agenda, this is a work session. Our first item on the agenda is an update from the Dakota County on the update or the reconstruction of Highway 50 and Flagstaff Avenue. I'm sorry, I don't have names to introduce you properly.
We can let them introduce themselves, but I
Okay.
just want to make one mention if people are watching online. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to project the
Thank you.
presentation that they brought, so it is linked in the agenda online if people want to go and follow on or look back later and stuff, so.
Mr. Chair, you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Good evening, Mike Slavic, Dakota County Commissioner for all of the Farmington School District with the exception of the Lakeville part. And we have transportation staff here that I will introduce and they'll kind of run the show, and I would assume that if there's questions, they can interject while the presentation is going on.
Great, thanks Mike.
So I'll let you.
Yes, I'm Erin LaVrie, the Director of Transportation at Dakota County.
Karen.
I'm Christy Sebastian, Dakota County Traffic Engineer.
Thanks Christy. Welcome to our meeting.
Thank you.
Do you want to get started?
You just want me to start? Yep. Sure. So I'm here today to talk about the Highway 50 and Flagstaff intersection and the project that we are moving forward with, some of the information about the intersection and background as to why we are looking at making some changes. So the meeting objectives we want to talk about today is discuss the safety concerns that we've heard regarding the intersection, then talk more broadly a little bit about the highway safety in Dakota County in general and how we approach through policies, review, and our overall practices to ensure safety throughout the system, and then how this intersection fits in. I'd like to share some traffic engineering principles. As I say, oftentimes, a lot of what we do, good techniques that are based in data and past practices, can be counterintuitive to what people expect until you really dive into them and talk about them. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'd like to recognize traffic engineering trade-offs. Doing one thing could mean something else is restricted or changed. So that'll be a piece of the discussion, particularly when it comes to traffic control. So I'd like to talk specifically about 50, 212th Street and Flagstaff Avenue fits in with the whole system in terms of safety, in terms of how it operates, and some of the considerations we're looking at. And then the future intersection project that we're proposing, have been talking with the school officials and the city for the last few months. So did you want me to say when I change screens, or do
That probably would be a good idea. Yeah.
Obvious?
I'm following, but
Sure. So I'm going to go to my next slide. Concerns that we've heard is a need for a safety improvement, particularly when students are leaving at the end of the day. There's a bit of a delay and some concerns with not finding gaps in traffic, causing safety concerns, particularly with leaving school, heading south, and trying to turn to go east. And that's the difficulty of that movement. So safety needs to be a priority. It's a priority throughout our strategic plan, throughout the work we do, and that's how we looked at the perspective of what should we do for this area. Then I'll talk a little bit about the crashes that have occurred at this intersection and how some of the action that we're looking at specifically look to address the collisions that are occurring, the concerns that we've heard. And last, the need for a long-term vision for the area. So the county system as a whole, we have 424 miles of roadway. The majority of intersections are actually side street stop with a little over 130 being traffic signals. We have a handful of always stops. I'm sure that number's about 36. And then we have some roundabouts. Highway 50 is an arterial that directly connects to Cedar Avenue on the west, and then Trunk Highway 3 to the east. Then of course County 50 ends and then becomes State Highway 50 continues on and connects even further through the county. So some of the top highway safety priorities for us and how we function is transportation plan. Safety is our overarching principle throughout the strategies and the practices, our budget. Much of what goes on through our transportation plan, and the new one was, the 2041 was just passed last year. Safety is the cornerstone of what we do. And while transportation, we focus on assessment and infrastructure changes, what we can do to build, modify the roadway, traffic control, signing, concrete, projects. We really recognize that that's only a piece of it, and we really need to work with our partners. We work very heavily with TZD, or Towards Zero Death Minnesota Coalition. We have a Dakota County Coalition, and that really embraces that there's 4 and even really 5 with everyone is involved. That there's an engineering component, and that's RE that we'll be talking about a little more heavily, but education, enforcement, and emergency services is another one. All these really play together in creating a safe environment. So before Farmington High School was even on the property that it is today, we were having conversations with the school, with the city, looking at what is the right practice, how do we provide safety around the school and travel. And that was something both for travel up to 64 and then also using Flagstaff, and really created some messages at that time. When there was some construction, we did some kind of non-conventional changes momentarily to address that there were other roads closed, and really monitored both the intersection for collisions and for traffic volume and just overall operation throughout this time. There was also a Farmington area study that looked at this intersection as well as several others throughout the county and what would be some long-term plans.
Quick question, was that all done prior to, you said prior to the school, so obviously it's prior to other properties coming out of ag going residential then, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, School Board member, but much of that work was done several years ago, yes.
Okay.
So hopefully I'm following along, telling you what I'm changing here. I'm just switching slides.
You're okay.
So from a traffic engineering perspective, we really look at risk management and recognize that a lot of collisions have multiple factors, and main factor involved is driver error, that something comes together, that either one or more errors occur to create a collision, as well as some things that we can do to improve it from an engineering, education, enforcement perspective. But in traffic control, it's really all about managing risk. And so I'm going to go through some of the trade-offs of different traffic controls, say what some of the benefits are and what some of the drawbacks are different things that we could consider. So switching to the next slide, the first trade-off, look at side stops and what they're used for, and then some of the drawbacks. They are really used, as I initially said, at the majority of intersections along the county highway and state highways. They are used for unbalanced approach flow, so the side road is stopping and then would complete a turn after they find a gap in traffic. It maintains the through road mobility, and it really actually has the lowest average crashes and severity of any type of intersection, and that is looking statewide, countywide at all intersections. Some drawbacks are that the side streets have to rely on gaps, and so at times there could be some side street delay, and if that delay is such that there is less gaps available, people can start to take chances, maybe take a gap that isn't as acceptable or misestimate a gap in traffic. So next to discuss here are traffic signals. Everyone drives through traffic signals, and often here, we're having a safety concern, please put in a traffic signal. This is one of the biggest pieces that is counterintuitive. Traffic signals have a great purpose. They're used when we have consistently high volume of flow and both a main roadway and in the crossroads. So a collector roadway, another county highway, state highways. When there's significant amount of traffic throughout a day, traffic signal can be sometimes the only measure that you have to make that work. Something like Cedar Avenue and several intersections, but Highway 42 comes to mind. There just isn't enough outside of an interchange grade separation. A traffic signal is really the only way we can manage that level of traffic. Some of the drawbacks. So there's a lot of additional decision making that goes on. So it assigns time for people to make a move. Some of those movements are protected. Others you have to wait for a gap in traffic to turn. And you have to be paying attention, knowing when you have a change in that indication. And so there is an increased risk at signals with people either not abiding by the red light or missing it, or other actions that they take, just not realizing how to navigate through the intersection. So they are actually our locations that tend to have the highest number of crashes. And why they have a higher volume, you think, well, that might be proportional, but it's actually when you consider the volume in the calculation, traffic signals tend to have not only our highest crash rates that it considers the volume, but also tend to be the locations with higher degree of severe crashes, our fatal and serious injury crashes. They also can create more delay, particularly if there's a lower volume time. Traffic has to wait for one car, maybe that's trying to get out, and the rotation cycle of the signal has to go around. So, and as kind of the bullet point then is they rarely improve safety for those actions. Now we certainly look to use the most advanced tools when we do need to put in a signal, but even considering those things, these are some of the drawbacks that we consider, and therefore.
When you say advanced tools, are you talking about, different lights are synced so that the green is always moving the same direction, the timing or the interval is slowed down? For instance, in a case like we're talking about on Highway 50 in Flagstaff, I would expect, a technology to be in place that's probably green during the hours from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. or so, and then there'd be a moment in time where there's probably more active switching through to allow that traffic that's southbound to make that. Were you planning to put a light in that place? That's what I'm asking.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's
I understand you're not
essentially-
planning to do that right now. I'm just saying in the hypothetical.
Right. At a location where we have a signal, nearly every location has detectors to understand how much traffic is there, what they would be serving. We do change how they operate based on time of day, and so
Yeah.
even with some of those tools to be more responsive, these actions, these drawbacks I'm talking about are still applicable.
Still there, okay.
So I just switched to the next slide to talk about the next trade-off and traffic control consideration, and that would be roundabouts. So roundabouts are used for moderate to high volumes of traffic. Outside of some of the extremely high volume locations that we might use a signal, like reference Cedar Avenue and Highway 42, some locations it really can be a decision between a roundabout and a signal. And they do improve traffic flow. They use for moderately high volumes. You really want a balanced flow with them. Say around 50-50, but certainly be a little bit off balance. But basically, if all the traffic is going in one direction, you occasionally have something on the side road, that isn't a good location for a roundabout. And then they really do work to improve safety. Now, at some of the multi-lane, because of that risk, the decision process, we do have the potential for more conflicts, more decisions, and so there can be crashes at roundabouts. They do not tend to be as severe, and that's the geometry doesn't allow that angle crash. So crash at a high-speed signal, somebody going through on a green while someone went through on a red, that can be a very serious injury crash. At a roundabout, that is not, you can't just go through because of geometry, so the
It's a
crashes
glancing
tend to
blow
be.
instead of a T-bone.
tend to be lower speed and then more at that side swipe. Some of the drawbacks, they do require that additional decision-making, as I pointed out. People need to know how to use them. They need to yield to both lanes of oncoming traffic if there are two through the interior circle. And there is that potential for an increase in property damage crashes, again, particularly with the multi-lane roundabouts. And I'll move to the next slide. The engineering review that takes place to assess traffic control and other actions. We do field review. We watch traffic, see what's happening at peak hours and even non-peak times. See what's going on. We'll pull crash data and do a safety review. Typically, we'll look at 3 or more years, depending on the type of intersection. Very rural locations, we'll look at more years because there's lower volume. They tend not to have, as crashes tend to be rare, and so we need to look at several years to look at trends. But in more of a metro area and other intersections, we'll look at 3 years of crash data. We'll also look at the traffic volumes and delay, seeing what's happening in terms of how long people are waiting, how many vehicles might be in the queue. And when we're looking at making traffic control decisions, we're looking typically at least 8 hours in an 8-hour need. That's the way the main warrants are for traffic signals to help assess if a traffic signal may be applicable. We also look at that in terms of roundabouts to see what's happening, not just at one key time of the day, but throughout the day and then kind of throughout the year. And then we look at that comparison system-wide so that we are assessing our whole system in a consistent manner. Switching to the next slide. Switching now to specifics for the County Highway 50 and Flagstaff intersection. We have done, as I noted at the beginning, traffic volume counts several times throughout the course of the school being here, but some recent counts both in the summer to see what's happening when school isn't in session and then when school is.
When's the last time that this intersection was studied?
I believe it was November of 2021.
Okay.
I don't know if I need the microphone, Mr. Chair. So to give a little background on some of that is the Farmington City Council had approached the county last fall and had requested so the intersection be looked at. So that is kind of where a lot of this work came about. It seemed to be about in every 5 to 6 years that request was done. And I think it was the third time in my time on the Dakota County Board that request was made. So all of the background that Christine had just shared with it is Christy had just shared is exactly what we went through in the fall of 2021. So,
Okay, thank you.
back to you.
So we looked at the collisions, what crashes were occurring, and we found 9 crashes in the last 3 years at this intersection. 5 of those involved a southbound vehicle. So the significance of that is that would be the direction of traffic coming from the high school, primarily in the afternoon, and heading towards 50. A signal or roundabout is not justified at this time based on the standard criteria applied for review. And so we looked at what else can we do to address the safety concerns we're hearing, and what might be the best approach.
Can I
This
pause you?
location,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Can you tell us a little bit more about that criteria and the justification? Like, is there a threshold over that period of study time in 3 years, typically, like you described? Is there, is there a percentage of safety incidents that must occur before a roundabout or a signal are considered?
Sure. Mr. Chair, school board member, the crashes are one consideration. There's also more in terms of the traffic volume.
Okay.
And so we really look at both within an assessment of what would be justified.
Okay, thank you.
So when school began, as I said, there was some messaging. We really recognized that there was a concern for that southbound to eastbound move, heading towards town, and really recognized that U-turns, why, again, this is some of the counter, people think it's less safe, but it's actually by breaking up the movements and the conflicts, making a right turn and then waiting in a left turn lane, so you don't have that risk of a rear end because you're waiting in a refuge area for the opposing traffic. So you're really waiting for first a gap in one direction of traffic, getting into a turn lane to make a U-turn, and then waiting for a gap in the opposing traffic, that can break up the movements and is actually a safer move. So we recognize that there's the proximity of the median and had encouraged that movement, and we can see by the counts that some of that is occurring, that many of the people are making that turn, and actually during peak times it can be faster to make that U-turn movement than sitting in the left turn lane. And we did observe that people would be queued up, waiting to make a left turn, seeing that right turn movement happening quicker, and then would jump over to the other lane and decide to make that right turn movement instead.
So, excuse me, I have a question. So when when you're out there watching that movement, is there a radius, a minimum radius that needs to be made for that U-turn? Do you take into account, any transition in lanes and oncoming traffic when you look at that? Or is it just kind of, hey, this is what our engineering says is that, U-turns are a safer maneuver in general based on other things? Or do you take into account how tight that radius is and where that takes people, and then potentially the transition along that road?
Sure, it's both. I mean, there is certainly data from a safety perspective, many locations that say U-turns are safe. Then we also looked at this area and said, what is happening? We both watched the location and we looked at the crashes to see, is there anything going on at that location?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jason. And similar to a concern that I have just from a practical standpoint. So I live off of County Road 66, so a similar approach was taken with Highway 52, where instead we now turn right onto Highway 52, have to cross 2 lanes of traffic to get in a U-turn lane, and then try to join oncoming traffic around 65 miles an hour. And so just, I mean, I've been driving for over 20 years. It's still it's something that I try to avoid at all costs, and I'm just concerned, especially with the inexperience of a lot of drivers using this road, that broadly speaking, I'm a data person. I completely understand like the big picture, that overall data indicates that this is safe, but given the nuances of this road in particular and the safety of our students and the lack of experience for most of these new and pretty fresh drivers, I just would be really concerned. I know it's not 65, but it is 50 on that road, and so to try and get over, again, cross the lanes of traffic and then join them just seems like
It's 50, but they're moving 60.
right. Yeah, it seems just concerning from a day-to-day usage. So I'll just share that.
I mean, I think it's a better point than I have, than maybe my other question, and that is where that U-turn would be is right in front of a resident's driveway. So have you spoken to that resident there? Because that U-turn would be directly right in front of their house. If I lived there, I would not appreciate that. Have they been communicated with of the possibilities that this could happen?
Yeah, I think they might.
Yeah, I can, Mr. Chair and school board members. So we've actually had a few staff changes recently, but our previous project manager has met with the property owners on the south side to talk to them about this project. The number of vehicles coming out of that driveway, we don't think that will be a conflict, only at rare occasions. The other thing I want to address is the turning radiuses. So when we do our designs, in our AutoCAD program, we have turning radiuses of different vehicles. So we can see what types of vehicles can make those movements based on the number of lanes, how much width we have, the shoulder width. So we ensure that vehicles are able to safely make that U-turn when we do a design like this. And then one last thing, the 52 and 66 intersection, that of course was just treacherous when you're trying to make a left turn or go through that intersection. So they call them R-cuts, that's what they're calling them on 52, reduced conflict intersections, which is essentially what we're trying to do here. And that change there has significantly decreased the crashes there. There's still issues, it's not perfect, but it has improved safety there, and that's a location we're considering an interchange for as well. So
Yeah, I know
I
that,
saw that too.
I know we're talking about the turning radius and kind of the disruption in that one driveway, but I spent a little time down there actually yesterday. And, you know, it's not just the turning radius at that U-turn, it's also that you have to cut over 2 lanes of traffic to get to that
Right,
U-turn.
That's correct.
In about 500 yards, or I think it's about 600 yards.
Yeah.
So I, you know, even with Sunday afternoon traffic, it was a little interesting a couple of times. I mean, but that's Sunday afternoon, not 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. So I just, I think what Jason was asking for is your observation kind of take into context that situation going on there, but I'm hearing turning radius and other considerations, but that, I mean, I think there's 2 opportunities for mischief, right? It's the rapid shift of, it doesn't have to be even inexperienced drivers, it can be anybody, moving from across 2 lanes to make that U-turn in a very short period of time. And with that, I mean, yeah, there's the turning radius into oncoming traffic moving 60, 65 miles an hour. But there's also that backup and clutter that's inevitably going to take place at that intersection, probably every afternoon,
Exactly.
right? And it's not just I think about the risk of the U-turn, but I also think about the rear end collision risk
Yeah.
as that traffic moves over to make that U-turn. Not everyone's gonna, and I think the only way I can think of to solve that is to extend a barrier that doesn't allow you to hit that first U-turn, but actually forces you down to the area of BTD manufacturing. So I don't know if some of those design considerations were considered, or if that scenario was part of the planning process. But I want to raise that because that's I mean, I understand the nuance between traffic light, roundabout, the costs, and some of the considerations there, but I am still, with this design, very concerned about those other motions, not just the U-turn,
'Cause
moving through there.
To your point, Kyle, I did the same thing. I drove down there again just to see how the flow would be. So I made a right-hand turn, and for me to get over, I almost had to come to a stop.
Yeah.
So then I have to worry about getting rear-ended on that. And then if I'm too slow to get over to the other lane, now I have to worry probably about 2 cars hitting me to get over to the other lane.
Right.
Another thing I want to mention is, at the end of the day, one of the busiest times of that intersection, you have buses taking that left because they need the space. They can't take the U-turn, so it cuts the visibility down to the right lane. So it's harder for them to see if there's a gap for them to get over the 2 lanes in a safe way. That's just another concern I have.
Sure. Would you like me to?
Please, yeah, I raised it, so
Yeah, just going.
that was sort of,
I mean, I
that was sort
think-
of editorial and question kind of melted into
Perfect.
one, so address how you'd like.
Absolutely. So I think the last one is maybe the easiest, because with an action that we'll be talking about, we think may work next, is if you eliminate the movement that has been the safety concern, you no longer have that visibility issue with buses or others. You only have that movement being made. When the R-cut was being done at US 52, there was much discussion in different groups within the Minnesota Department of Transportation assessing what is the right length and looking at different, and there are some different philosophies. You can make it go very long. It's almost a quarter mile if you do something that you can get into the right lane, and then you can slowly get into left lane, and then you get into the left through lane, then you get into the refuge area and make a U-turn. That draws things out, particularly in a high volume, high speed roadway as you have in 52. Then there's also the thought, if you make it shorter, people will be more likely to use it, and they'll do it in one movement. So they'll look for a gap, and they'll make more of a continuous movement to the right through and get to their lane. And they did reduce a couple locations in the end and made them closer, and felt that was more how traffic wanted to drive, and made the area work. We can look at, do we eliminate or do something where we encourage people to go further down? And you certainly can if some people are not comfortable getting into that first one. There are other U-turn opportunities. We've looked at the radius and the distance, the gaps in watching traffic, and felt that it's being done today by quite a few students, people at the end of the day. We felt that they did have those gaps, that was working, so we weren't looking to eliminate that U-turn. That also would make some difficult action with the farmer, the property owner on the south, if we were to eliminate that location. But for those reasons, we do think the one that is in place is applicable, but there's certainly, through education and discussion, if someone is feeling less comfortable, they can continue on and make a U-turn further down the road.
Yeah, I think the difference is now it's an option, and in a year it's gonna be required. So you're moving from probably a trickle of cars doing that to now, in an ideal world, drivers will take a left out of the parking lot, go up to 195th and come back down Pilot Knob. I mean, ideally, there's other ways that students can get home rather than taking a south on Flagstaff and getting back into the eastbound lane. Whether or not they always will do that, or whether this is something that'll work out in practice pretty well for a month or two and then everyone slides back into their old habits, that's the hypotheticals I think about a little bit. But right now you've got an option to take that right and then move the U-turn. Now you're gonna run, maybe a couple hundred cars into there over the course of an hour or two, right? And that does really, in my mind, change scenario planning. So I don't know, again, I guess, is that part of the calculation that went into what the county was going into too?
It was. We looked at what traffic is there today, making rights and making lefts, and moving those lefts over. Do they have gaps? Can they make that movement?
I mean, do you know how many are actually taking a left-hand turn there now?
It certainly
Not
varies.
to pull your ring
Day
for
to day,
data,
but in November, when we counted it at the peak, the school peak, 2:45 to 3:45, it was 96 lefts at that.
Okay, thank you.
point. Throughout the day, it is significantly less.
Sure.
And one difference, and we heard this through the council and the school meetings that we had, was now there's also that additional roadway connection to Cedar. And so some traffic that is heading out that way has another way to disperse.
Alternate, yeah.
And Jason, can you talk about, with the buses unable to take a left-hand turn there, how does this impact our busing routes and our costs associated with that?
We'll have to add, the buses will not be able to make that U-turn. Tom won't, Marshall Lines won't allow it, so, and I don't think it's even possible. So, it'll add more routes and it'll add more time. So if they can't access eastbound 50 from Flagstaff, then they will have to join the queue and either head out and head back north out of Flagstaff, up and around to get back to downtown Farmington, or they can use that north drive. And there's times, right? We can all time things out. There's times where I've gone out that way and I beat people making left, but then there's also times where if you don't time it up right, so they got to plan on the long end of things and stuff. So, when we've talked to Tom about this multiple times, it's going to be additional routes. He doesn't know how many. And we run our second tier to third tier is super tight the way it is. So we typically have kids at Bachman waiting 10 to 15 minutes some days for their buses to get back from dropping off the second tier routes. And so we'll probably have to evaluate start times in some way, shape, or form if they don't have access. That will be the impact.
So we'd have to evaluate start times due if this change goes through.
Potentially, because so we'll have to start with the routing, what
Okay.
Marshall Lines thinks that they need to be able to do and how to access.
Sure.
And then have to go from there.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly it helps to understand kind of the ripple effect.
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
we're all in agreement that we want the intersection to be safer, but understanding too that there's also a continued bus driver shortage, additional routes, not necessarily having adequate staffing, and if that continues, it's just could impact a number of things district-wise,
So continuing through data, talking about traffic control and bike crashes, move to the next slide. And this is a demonstration from MnDOT. All the orange and gray are their general intersections and how they rate. First, the gray is the crash rate, and the orange is severity, considering how severe the crashes are, including injury crashes. And this is a real counterintuitive piece. The stuff on the left is all unsignalized intersections, your rural through stop, and urban, so just the side road has a stop, always stops, and then you have various types of signals. And in general, the signalized locations, as I mentioned prior, have higher crash rates, and then more importantly, those severity rates. the blue, purple here, the left is the crash rate and the right is the severity rate of 50 and in Flagstaff.
Interesting that high volume, low speed has the highest severity rate.
So in recent years now, MnDOT's combining some of those as well. It's harder to sometimes get what the speed is, you know, and is that consistent from officer to officer, you know, so some of that data is now being combined. So I'd look at it more, you know, with the four together, that the signals tend to be locations, again, because of those red light running, maneuvers at the intersection, all the decisions, that they do tend to be higher crashes. So we're very careful, and rarely do we look at those as a safety tool. I've now added the green here. This is the crash. If you hit the button again on your slide, you'll see the crash rate for single lane roundabouts and then severity. And they really fall somewhere between an all-way and a rural stop, although they address things from a mobility standpoint. They have a lower rate. But this is indicating for 50 in Flagstaff, I mentioned the crashes that are happening are now at a rate that is higher than other side stops. And that's what we've been hearing, and the reason we met with the city and the school was to look at addressing this safety concern, and it's coming out in the data as well.
Would you estimate, as far as the crash rate and severity rate for the proposed solution, somewhere between the current rate and the roundabout rate? What would you ballpark the improvement on that?
It would typically be even lower than the roundabout rate, because you are eliminating significant numbers of the conflicts that can occur.
Okay. Thanks, that's helpful.
So in terms of, it talked in general about the different traffic control types, and so now I just wanted to kind of run through them from specifics to how they work at 50 and Flagstaff, and to note that this type of option to restrict some of the movements that are the most at most risk of crashes, that being that southbound left turn movement. This is something we have done at other schools, other areas, and with success to address safety issues. So with a traffic signal, we would potentially, as you saw from the data, that increased risk of both crashes and injury risk. We really could increase the delay for all traffic, except potentially the time when the school traffic's coming, you reduce the delay for the time that the school's coming out, before or after school. But otherwise, throughout the day, throughout the year, we're seeing delay that we wouldn't otherwise have. And really, the pods would be assigned time to cross, you know, where we're struggling with the gaps, or people maybe not taking the right gap when they're making those left turns. This is the signal, that's their main ability, is to assign time. A side stop really does have that lowest risk of crashes and injury, but of course what everyone has seen there is the queuing of traffic, uncomfortable delay, maybe having difficulty estimating what the speed or what the gap is when you're able to make your turn. So some near-term considerations in specifically looking at what is the concern and what are the crashes that are occurring. And so we start out with the preliminary, I did flip slides, preliminary one on the left, and that's more of a traditional restricted intersection or partial access, where you allow left turns from the main line, which only have to yield to through traffic, but you restrict the movements from the side road, because those are always last. They have to wait for the left turns coming in, they have to wait for the through traffic, and left turner has to wait for somebody crossing on the side road as well. So it would be restricting those movements. As Aaron had mentioned, the discussions we had with the property owners, particularly concerning farm vehicles, what we can do, and recognizing that there's very low traffic on the south side, and that isn't the direction that is having safety issues, we moved to a different option on the right called the preferred, where we are shifting the lane as you head on Flagstaff and all traffic now is in one lane, so that cut down some of the rear end or that lane jogging. It still is at an angle that you can see traffic on 50 well, and then can make that right turn to then continue on to the west or make a U-turn at one of the locations west of Flagstaff.
So there wouldn't be a physical median in the preferred option?
It would be a median on Flagstaff that would shift over enough to be aligned with the existing median. So I can't point to that, but if you look at,
Which color is concrete?
yeah, the blue would be a median, but it would be on Flagstaff. If you look on 50, as it is today, there is a median to the left of a left turner. And so that really, there's an overlap there that allows it to function similar to what you would be doing with restriction within the median. So what this does, it leaves the south approach alone to address concerns with the residents of farming vehicles being able to come on the south side, but also addressing the specific safety issues, the crashes that we have seen and what we have heard of on the north side for traffic from the school heading towards 50.
So I have it, so how far does that jog that over? So that little on-ramp that's gonna be created, how far over does that? And then, I'm assuming because it's not extended that there isn't any extension of that immediate U-turn lane to make that longer for people to queue into it if they wanna make that. There's no change in that U-turn lane or that first U-turn that was discussed earlier.
So I was describing
So it's
about
just-
I was describing about 500 yards to make that jog over those lanes, but then there's also only about, 5-6 car lengths
Mhm.
of a turn lane
Yep.
for waiting queuing?
Something like
Is that
that.
what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, because I mean, you're shortening the time people potentially have to get over. So I'm just wondering how much that cuts off. And then, again, I think our question from the administrators in the district would be is, again, right, it's a choice now to make that right-hand turn and a U-turn. I think Kyle had mentioned, right, it's gonna be forced. And so you potentially have more cars backed up in that because it's now, it's gonna be forced. So does this extend that at all or no? It's just gonna, that U-turn is gonna stay the way it is currently? It is, okay.
The U-turn will stay. In terms of time, it's inconsequential. This might be, I haven't measured it, I don't know if Aaron you know, but I would say it's shifting it over 30 feet, maybe
And-
50. It's not taking it down a significant point where it would have an impact on both the time or the ability to queue in the U-turn area.
So to clarify, the stop sign's eliminated as part of this, it would be continuous traffic down Flagstaff?
No, there would still be a stop sign. It would just be moved over.
Okay.
Now, is that land, I'm assuming
I think that
it's
red box
owned by
is
a
also
farmer that you would have to negotiate with to purchase it?
It's owned by a resident. We would need to purchase right away, yes.
Okay.
I guess thinking about the queue and similar to how you have an on-ramp on to, one of our interstates. Is the stop sign, I guess, needed? I'm thinking now continuous traffic, if it were moving a little more steadily than stop and go, must the stop sign stay or would a yield sign be sufficient?
Considering the speed and the volume on 50, a stop sign here would be the appropriate action.
Okay.
And I'll also add that if there was no stop sign, we would need some type of dedicated lane
Okay.
for that traffic to
Okay.
turn into,
Yep.
Okay.
not go into the lane of traffic along 50,
Got it.
so.
That makes sense, thanks.
And that wouldn't be an option, I guess, to Hannah's point on that, to keep the flow going, to have a yield sign there, you'd have to put an extra lane in there.
Mhm.
Has that even been,
No, I mean, the scope starts to increase quite a bit when we start to look at adding a lane of traffic onto 50.
The other considerations, the acceleration lane actually needs quite a bit of distance, and then younger drivers now, you're trying to merge over, you need a lot of distance, and then you're looking kind of behind you as opposed to waiting where you can see the traffic very well
Okay.
and then make
Got it.
that movement.
That makes sense.
So moving to the next slide, the future considerations. Flagstaff will continue to be reviewed as development occurs. The preferred alternative we talked about can be done rather quickly. I'll talk about the schedule in the next slide. But we do recognize that the plans for the city intend to keep things, at least at this point, agriculture to the south, but there'll be some plans for commercial and more residents to the north. So as traffic conditions change, we continue to monitor, work with the city. I think ultimately they envision doing a study when development occurs to assess the impacts. And then another consideration is the 4-lane need on County Road 50 does continue until there is the change in the roadway configurations overall. So very, very long term, there's the idea that 50 would become more of a local collector, and the east-west roadway for the county through our east-west corridor study is more on the 74 alignment, but that is a very long-term, over 20-year out. It's nothing that's in our CIP other than the vision that's out there at this point. So some things we've been doing, as the Commissioner had mentioned, people from the city approached us, asked us to, we always monitor our system-wide, but we put in additional review and assessment here at the request when some recent collisions happen. We've been engaged with meetings, city workshops, and meeting with school officials. The bus operator, someone from the bus company, was at one of our meetings. These occurred in late 2021, earlier this year. We did engage through the design process with some of the owners, and that led to that change in the design that you saw earlier. And we anticipate a public open house happening in either late September, early October of this year to go through the concerns here and the actions. And this is kind of similar process to what we've done some other locations at high schools and other schools in other areas that really do not have that level of traffic throughout the day, throughout the year, but have a specific concern and want to see that as more of a permanent change than just an education to make those right turns. Construction would then occur, we anticipate, in September 2022, wrapping up by February, and I think the majority of it would be done sooner than that, but maybe some of the work would need to occur in February. We do need right-of-way from the northwest quadrant, and that right-of-way acquisition would take place later this year and into 2023, with construction then happening in summer 2023. And if I suppose when I talk about the construction plans, if I misspoke and said construction, I apologize. I was talking about the design.
If this does go through and then the construction does start in the summer, would the goal be to make sure it's completed before the school year starts?
The essential work done by the time school starts, yes, correct. There might be some seating or some things,
Okay.
but that'd be the intent.
Okay.
So you had mentioned that this has been done outside a high school, a couple high school. What high schools?
Sure. So on Dodd, Highway 9 at 194th by Lakeville North is one location where partial access was built.
So, but that, am I correct by that? But that's by that elementary school. Is that on the west side? So that would be.
It's right by the high school. It's one of the high school's main access areas, 194th. I think it can also be called Indiana.
Okay.
And then we are moving forward for construction this year of a plan on 160th, Highway 46, in Lakeville, at Diamond Path, actually a county road on the north and a local collector on the south. We're looking there, and then there is a school in the southwest corner, an elementary school at that location.
So I guess, I had a couple questions, I guess. So if I look at Pilot Knob and 50, we got a traffic light there, it makes total sense, right? We have that there. So we go to Flagstaff, and we're just gonna continue to see it grow. I mean, we're gonna get more and more residentials. The school's getting booked more in the summer, constantly on weekends and stuff. The traffic is gonna be pretty good flowing that way. Is the issue a cost issue? Then help me understand the logic of not having a traffic light at an intersection like that. since we have it on Pilot Knob, and we do know, again, we're gonna get growth. We already have it booming down there. We're gonna get probably growth on the other side and on the other side of 50. And we talk about safety. Help me understand. I mean, you're not convincing me that this makes any sense to
Next
do
slide.
something like that.
That's your next slide that explains that. Isn't it, or do you not have that slide anymore?
No,
That's the one.
Traffic control comparison.
sure, I mean, we can talk from there, but
But
I
I'm
think
not
from a
talking.
safety
Let
perspective.
me finish. I'm not talking statistics though right now. I'm talking just logic. If we look at 50 and Pilot Knob,
Yep.
there's not housing down there, but that's a busy intersection, very crazy. So now we have all these residential houses going up right down here. I mean, booming. And yet we have another development coming up here in Meadowview. We'll probably, when it comes out of ag, have more development down there. Wouldn't it make sense to do it right the first time and put a traffic light up there than something like this? I'm struggling to understand the logic behind it.
Can I
That's
try
all.
something from a non-engineer status? Because nobody's ever accused me of being an engineer. And I apologize.
Yep.
So one of the differences on that is, so you have 4 legs. You have Flagstaff going north-south, you have 50 going east-west. And the difference on there, you have 3 legs with 50 and Flagstaff, or 50 and Pilot Knob, which have more comparable to similar amounts of traffic going north-south and or going south or north, depending on you're going there, using all 3 of the legs. The challenge that this has had, and that I'm aware of just over on other projects, is there's a whole leg that gets like virtually no traffic whatsoever. And that's what you, when you build a stoplight, you are gonna have people who, you're gonna have a thing during the day going north-south that's gonna be sitting there where you're gonna have extra cars backed up trying to go on 50 because I think the number is what, 90-10 roughly?
But you can control that, the flow of traffic with the
Right.
green light. I mean, that's a simple solution. That's just, I forgot what you call those, a traffic magnet.
It's not as easy as you think. It's somewhat,
There's an
but yeah,
expense
yeah,
to it,
yeah,
I
yeah.
understand, Mike, but
So
I mean, and I'm gonna use another example. If you look at Pilot Knob and 179th Street, before that street was all the way through, nobody would drive on it because you couldn't get Cedar.
Yep.
Now it's crazy. There was an accident. Lakeville Police, unfortunately, have to sit there for speeding. So every time we create these new entities, this is what's gonna happen. And that's why I'm trying to understand, what is the cost of a traffic light down there? Do we know that? Compared to this?
So we don't specifically know the cost at this location.
Okay.
I can tell you in general, and I can tell you here, it would be likely much more costly because we do have that transformer on the northeast side
Correct. Yep.
to contend with. But depending on the type of signal happening, it's somewhere over 300,000 to 600 plus for the intersection to be signalized. This is not about cost though, it's really about doing the right thing with the right timing.
Well, again, I'm struggling with that comment because the right thing, I look at Pilot Knob in 50, so really Pilot Knob in 50 doesn't need a traffic light then, in theory. I mean, but yet we have one there, and then we don't have one here, and we're building it up tremendously, which is great for the community. And residents are now gonna be subjective to different traffic flow. And then when we build more and more and more, are we gonna come back and say we should have done this 10 years from now as ag property comes out and we see what certain families are doing with it? I'm just logically struggling with that. We keep using the safety issue. And to me, this is not a safety issue. If I had a kid in school today driving, I mean, like I said, I was down there the other day and it scared the hell out of me sitting there going out there. And I've been driving for 54 years, well, no, not 54 years, that's what we're doing, for quite a while. And
Big wheel.
Big wheel. I'm just not seeing, when we say safety, to me, we have driver ed go down through there. We know we have buses that go down there. Now we go back to the public and saying we have to possibly change start times or increase bus routing due to this potential. I'm just struggling with this right now of comprehending the logic behind it, that's all.
I think another way to say that is, do you see a time when they're going to replace what's in that intersection, and what would they be replacing it with? Right, because I think what you're asking is, What you're getting at is inevitably.
If we're gonna do it.
If we do it direct, the issue is a transform. I drove down there, I could see right away what the issue is. I mean, that's the issue. If that wasn't there, I
You
think.
still have to bump the intersection over to accommodate.
Correct, but I
or
think we
move
could
the
have a different
transformer.
conversation, and I'm no expert, but I know enough about construction to say if that wasn't there, I think it would change a lot of people's minds on that, because it'd be a heck of a lot cheaper and make more sense to put it there. That's my take on it.
The transformer certainly makes things more difficult,
Mhm.
but you still have that, the idea that the traffic signal is needed for high volumes of traffic throughout the day. We have a busy time with the school. Throughout the rest of the day, it is lower volume. Yes, we know more traffic is coming in. Eventually, it'll grow, but it is not coming to the point that it is going to make a difference in the next several years. And so what we've heard is that there's a safety concern that we want to address. This is the right approach to address that specific safety issue and address it in a timely manner, through construction next year, as opposed to leaving a safety concern until you really have more traffic. And then, why we may need to put in a signal somewhere like we have at Pilot Knob and 50, we also will then note that we are going to likely continue to have crashes and severe crashes. That's a piece of a signal. We'll do what we can to operate it well, but there still is delay, there still is times where people need to stop. And so that's the trade-off here, that we feel this is the right action for what's happening now, and in really the short, midterm, that this is the appropriate thing to address the safety issues that we are hearing from your students, parents, the community.
So what determines if this happens or not?
Mm-hmm.
Who determines if this takes place and actually builds it the way you guys want it built? What say do we have in it, or what's the process of that? It's obviously not a vote. So what is the process of that?
I can attempt to answer some of the questions. So ultimately, we would like support from the school district, the city, before we go out and move forward. I mean, that is the ideal situation, is that we're all on common ground. So that's why we're here tonight, to answer questions about concerns that you might have. The main issue we're trying to resolve is the safety issue with students trying to make that left turn. So we get requests every year throughout the county from different cities, different developments, different schools to put in a traffic signal, because it does seem intuitive that that's going to be the fix to improve safety. But all the statistics show that it actually decreases safety. So if the traffic signal was a magic bullet to fix safety, we would have probably a lot more signals at intersections throughout the county, but it really doesn't do that. And so before we install a signal, we are looking at traffic volumes. A signal really manages traffic flow. It's assigning that right of way and who can go and who can't. So we have warrants, traffic signal warrants, and they have to meet the 8-hour warrants. We have to get enough traffic for 8 hours of the day to make that signal warranted, so that there's enough flow to manage that traffic. And then that's the trade-off, is you're gonna probably increase some of your crashes, but you're decreasing your delay, you're managing that traffic flow better. So when development does occur in this area, it's something that we'll keep on our radar, and as development happens, we'll be working with the city, seeing how much traffic is generated, and when that number is hit, that threshold is hit on Flagstaff and 50, we can install a traffic signal within a year or two.
I have a question for Kennedy real quick. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Kennedy, but do you drive, and if you do you use that intersection, and have you tried making a U-turn from that intersection as it is right now? And what has been your experience when the kids are, everybody's trying to get out?
It's very hectic at the end of the school day. Being a sophomore, when I got my license, so I'll be going into my junior year. I was in that back lot, so I used the new exit a lot of the times, which worked out well. There was some times where I had to get over to the right lane because I'd see some risky shots from someone going left, and I didn't feel comfortable staying in that left lane, so I went over to the right lane. There was a few times though where I did take that left turn, and it was always just like, I felt like we waited there for a while. It did help with the traffic signals at the two sides. Like it feels more comfortable with the opening because you can kind of accelerate as you're going through. But then that U-turn, I personally just rather take the back way than the U-turn or go left onto Flagstaff, just because the U-turn feels small. Like, I mean, it's not small, but it just seems more risky with like the residential being right there. I know a lot of my peers feel that same way, especially just being that new driver. We don't really have as much skills under our belt, as much confidence, or on the other end of the spectrum, too much confidence. And so that's kind of my experience with it.
Just, thank you. I was just curious as your
Yeah.
perspective with that. Because I have concerns with kids. I could see kids waiting for an opening and just shooting right into that left lane and cutting somebody. I mean, I could see more accidents happening with this, just my personal opinion, with kids darting over there, because I've been at that intersection when school's gotten out. I thought, holy cow, this is a nightmare. And forcing those kids to go that way, not many kids, I don't think, are going to be patient enough to try and go all the way down to the next one to make a U-turn. And so they're going to dart, and I could see them blocking that whole, that's just my perspective on that. So I have concerns. I agree with Steve. I'd rather just do a light, and because that residential area is growing as well, and I think you're going to get a lot of community feedback once you do your open house. I think a lot of people are going to express concerns for this and wanting that traffic light. That's my perception and opinion.
And
What was the city's opinion on this solution?
So do you want to speak on that behalf, or?
Well, we don't,
Give us a
I was gonna make a comment. We don't typically do public comment in the middle of our meetings.
yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I can-
when I attended,
yeah.
the mayor was gracious enough to let Jason and I say a few words, but that's typically not the format
okay,
for
that's-
our meetings. There is, and the gentleman in the back asked about it. So
Okay,
that
sure.
is it.
Well,
There is a time at the end of the agenda for public comment.
So if I can start back with, as I said before, 3 times in my 10 years as York County Commissioner have I gone and had this exact conversation. It's either been driven by the school district, or driven by the city council, or driven by community members saying, this is unsafe. And what kind of has happened in the past, and there is an analysis has been done by the county that says data does not support doing anything. And that has been the response 2 of the 3 times, was there's accidents, they're going to happen. It's unfortunate. The best option on here is the E that goes and is related to education. And every couple years, Christie's gone and worked out some stuff with county communication, and it's been given to all the new drivers, and then either the administration changes or the kids change, and that goes away. So that it works for a brief amount of time of just handing out a flyer, but quite frankly, probably kids aren't really reading the flyer anyway, so I don't know how much that works on that part in there, but at least it's getting to the level through the media, through parents, and through young drivers on that. In November, December, quite frankly, the conversation was saying, we got to do something. The accidents the argument was the data wasn't showing an increase, it was just the accidents that have always been. So one of the alternatives is, we don't do anything until the numbers support it, and then we wait till we add a few more developments, and the numbers unfortunately create a more severity, and then we do the big thing, the longer term, the stoplight or roundabout, that's part of it. If I may quickly, so the city was really involved in this part in here, realizing that, and please wave if I'm out of line, Mr. Mayor, but just that doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. And doing something is still going to be doing that, even if it shifts the change in there. And so this is kind of what has been going on there, no different than 66 and 52. My first 2 years as county commissioner, there were 2 deaths. You lived there, and there were 2 deaths at that exact intersection. There hasn't been a death there since they've done that 7 years ago. And that's been one of the aspects in there. There still are accidents that happen there, and my wife refuses to, when we have to go as a family, to go that. We now go to Hampton to get here, but I still, as more of a gutsy guy by myself, I still go and do it. But so I think that's just kind of where we are in there. But I wanted to answer briefly Mr. Carrero's or school board member Carrero's point in the who makes the decision on here. I think that ultimately it's a county road, it's a county intersection, and it's that's where the final decision is made. But if we can't find a solution with our partners, then we're not, I mean, we've got to work with you, not just on this intersection, but so many other projects on there. So I think being good partners and working with our stakeholders matters. The reason why we want to do this open house is we know that we're going to get beat up on this party here, because the answer is going to be, why aren't you doing X? And the answer that we can say is the data doesn't support that yet. And the data doesn't maybe necessarily support this, but the data doesn't support the long-term aspect in there either. So,
But if I'm looking at long-term planning, that's a financial risk. So I'd be curious of what the risk is right now, of how much it would cost to purchase that piece of property, to do all this, compared to what it would cost for a traffic light. If it's, say, 400, I don't know, I'm just throwing numbers.
3 million is what previous county engineer said for the whole,
For the traffic light.
and all of the acquisition.
Traffic circle or traffic light?
Roughly the same as what Mark had shared with us at the meeting. we had.
It sounds about right,
That's
yeah.
including right-of-way acquisition and moving and redesign.
So you'd have to purchase, either way, you would have to purchase land from the resident down there?
Yeah, we would likely need to purchase right away for the traffic signal. I don't know that we have done a design on a traffic signal.
Yeah, so when I look at it, either way, you're probably purchasing land to either shift, you're talking about that big, pole that's right on the, kind of misplaced on the corner there, right?
Right.
So either you move the pole or you move the road, right? I don't know which one's more cost effective. I imagine they're
We're
both
off
a
by
big pain.
a factor of 10, I think.
Say again?
A factor of 10 for the median changes at like 300,000 versus a signal at 3 million.
Okay, so, okay, got it.
And that's purchasing property?
That's
as
for the
well?
total construction cost, including property acquisition.
Okay, and then if we're long-term planning, as we do as a community, we know what's gonna happen this way. What the goal is for the city and community is to grow it. So we know that's gonna happen. So, again, why wouldn't we do it right the first time instead of kind of putting a Band-Aid fix on it right now? And that's where I say, is it the dollars that we're looking at? That's what concerns me about it. And I know we shake our heads no, or that's my struggle on this, is when I look at this, it's a $3 million investment for everybody. For the future, you're not gonna have to do it. $3 million now is probably gonna be $15 million 10 years from now. Everything's gonna go up. So if we did it right now, I guess I would like to see the total cost on that compared to if we did it in the future. And it's a gamble, because we know it's gonna grow. I guess that's my sticking point as I look at Pilot Knob and 50 compared to this. This is gonna be as busy as we continue to grow, and statistics are great, but we do already know what's gonna happen. We do know what the city's doing down there, which is great, building. And we have stuff coming out of ag eventually. So we know there's gonna be more building. We know what's gonna happen. You know, it's just like we had a pre-plan for this building years back. I'm just struggling trying to make heads or tails on it from not only a safety issue, but a common sense traffic flow issue. And I'm no expert on it, that's all.
So in that 10, 15, 20-year time frame, we would have an unwarranted signal up. And as Chrissy went through all the data, we see that increases crashes. So we're gonna have a signal that's not warranted with an increase in crashes, an increase in severe crashes at that intersection. So that's a big safety factor in the negative column. And so, we've got development all throughout the county. We have these conversations, we've had them with all these schools that Chrissy just mentioned. It's intuitive to want that signal, and it's truly not about the finances, it's really about the safety.
Have we had significant crashes on Pilot Knob and 50 then? What's with the traffic light there?
I'm not sure if we have that data handy right now.
Yeah, we didn't look at each one, but in the 46 and Diamond Path that we did show a graphic, and it showed all the intersections around the area, and the signals were all where we had not only the higher crash rates, but then the more severe rates. I don't specifically know each one in this area today, but that carries through not just a statewide piece of data, but really in our community.
And I think too, one of the things that we have to be mindful of, because I hear your concerns, Steve, and I empathize with those. One of the things that I consider putting myself in your shoes is trying to justify to taxpayers spending $3 million on a light that the data does not support at this time. Because if we're, and you and I were both involved in like the 2040 comp planning, right? There's all kinds of roads planned throughout Farmington, but we're not laying all the pavement right now. You know, that's gonna happen over time. And so I see and I appreciate the responsiveness to our community's needs, because to Mike's point, we reached out and technically the data is still not there to support it right now, but and especially knowing funding decisions for the many competing projects, transportation related, I appreciate that something is being considered and proposed, but I think within the scope of our role as a board, we can provide feedback, we can ask questions, we can offer ideas, but ultimately, it sounds to me, if I'm interpreting right, it's either do nothing or do this. And so we can spend the next few hours talking about it, but if I misunderstood, if there's a design, if we can meaningfully influence, or if the community engagement things would change it, but from my understanding, and this kind of goes with the work that we're doing on community engagement, making it, that's part of the framework, right, is helping the community understand we're not here to collaborate in a way that informs the design decision. We're gonna trust our data and our engineers to do that, but we're here to consult with you so that you know this, you know, why we're doing this, and we can respond to your concerns. And so I just appreciate the thoughtfulness that you've put into your presentation tonight and have shared with us.
Now, I was just curious, so you mentioned there's a threshold for there to be a warranted traffic signal. So let's say that threshold was met tomorrow, just hypothetically, it was met tomorrow. How long would it take to go through the process? Would it be that, like, right now it's about a year? I think you mentioned 1 or 2 years. Would there be a lot of initiatives to do that immediately? Or how would you go at that if that threshold was met? Yeah. Would it be like an immediate, like, try your best to get it done?
Yeah, I can, so we have a process of programming projects into our 5-year capital improvement plan, which we do it every year. So we would put it in our program. It would probably be about a 2-year process. We would, you know, we kind of know what the design is, but we would have to purchase right of way, and that's a full year-long process to do it. So it is typically, at a minimum, a 2-year process until we can get the signal up and running.
Well, and I can just vouch for the prioritization process that you go through as part of that. When you know that I live off of County Road 66, and there's a roundabout going up there right now, which is really appreciated. And I know that was a project that was originally slated for 2024, but was moved up to 2022 because they were following the data on that road and the number of crashes. So for, as a resident, knowing that you're continuously looking at, key roads within our communities and evolving as needs change is really appreciated.
If I may, Mr. Chair, and I'll say that some of, there's obviously, you saw the preferred versus the initial design in here, and there's been conversations, and one of the concerns that you've shared in here, I have also shared with staff, and that has been, it hasn't really, it's actually been the length of the queue has been one of my concerns, not as much the crossing over, because if you do 52 and 66 often, I've had the State Patrol, when that was first went in there, said you're not supposed to go into one lane and then into the other. You are actually supposed to go right over there, and that's actually how, as was said, traffic patterns would end up going. That's how most people will go, and you'll get used to that very quickly too. You'll see it clear in both lanes, and you're just going to go right there. But I also know, as someone who goes and speaks to all the 9th grade civics classes every year, and then tries to get out of here at the end of the school day, how much the challenge is, no matter what way you're going to get out of that parking lot. And if you're going to have 60, 70, 80 cars trying to get in that 1 45-minute period in there, that has been a concern I have shared in here. And one of the things why I maybe speak with some confidence is to that point, that if something doesn't quite feel right on there, the conversation, they can go in and is it figuring out a way to address that intersection or lengthen it, or I have full confidence in that part, because that's probably the biggest concern I have in this. I think this will truly be safety, cause less accidents, but for the fact of that U-turn lane, and I know that staff's heard me say that before, to stay on alert with that one in there. And we also know, the current 2040 comp plan for Farmington has all of this land around the school as zoned agriculture. We know that's not going to happen in the next 18 years. It may be happening sooner than later on some comp amendments, but that was some of it. As that changes in there, that certainly is going to change what is done in here on the process.
One last thing before, just what Kennedy had asked, this is where I'm at. I agree with what Hannah said. I'm glad something's being done versus nothing, because we all know something needs to be done there. However, my concern is when, just thinking this through, when Kennedy had asked his question, when the data starts really presenting itself, we're talking about crashes, possibly fatality crashes. How many of those crashes are going to involve our students? And if it's going to take 2 years to plan, or even a year to get a stoplight then in, where, 50th and Flagstaff, how many more people have to be injured before we finally get that stoplight? That's my thought process at this time. However, we all know something is better than nothing, but thinking of that future, and having truthfully a son that's going to start driving and his friends that are going to take that route, that's very concerning, because when we talk about data, we're talking about accidents of any kind, rear enders, fatality. I mean, all, that's concerning for me. But something's better than nothing. We can't let it continue.
One comment. So when developments occur, they generally don't occur all at once. And when they do occur, all of the homes aren't constructed all at once. It usually takes time, sometimes many years. So when we get a development in, goes to the city, it comes to the county for review, they generally do a traffic generation analysis. So we know how much traffic's going to come out of a development once it's fully built. So we will have a head start before all this traffic comes, so we can start planning for that traffic signal so it's up and running once all those homes are built, all those kids are driving to school. So we'll have some lead time on that.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit
Because
better.
of the complexity of this location, I think, more so than other located areas, that makes some sense to start having those discussions. What would we move Flagstaff over? Would we relocate the transformer? How much would that be? Is that the only concern? Because even if you move it, we still have that east-west line, and if you have a signal, you need to get a distance under it that is allowable for your lights and everything. So there could be, when in advance of the justifications, not just warrants, but justifying that the signal's the right approach, and consideration, particularly with the safety piece, is do we begin to do a design? And that's something through our CIP process we can talk to the city and say, are you interested in class participating moving forward with the design, and when might that make sense, so that we have a better idea of what it might look like here because of the additional complexities.
So there's one last question I have. You said November 21 you had the data from that. So that data has all these houses built then that are down here right now, or does not in your information right now? Because I have written down you did a study in November 2021.
We took counts at that time. So exactly how many homes, if there's a development,
nothing
how many
in the
homes were in there, I
Nothing
couldn't
okay.
tell you at that point.
Okay.
But it's looking at both summer and the school year. It's really the school year students that are driving the main times that it's busy. Throughout the day, the volume tends to still be relatively low.
Okay. Thank you.
Jason, do you have any other questions that you've had a chance? Okay. Jacqueline? Okay. I guess my one question is what else do you need from the school district? I anticipate there's probably some student education. What else can we do? Ultimately, we care about the safety of students and the disruption of the operations here. But ultimately, once a decision is made to go forward, I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to help it be successful, not just for the next 2 years, but when the students today are going to be gone, and my sophomore is gonna graduate in 3 years, and he doesn't need education about this intersection anymore, but the incoming freshman will. So how do we kind of keep that sustainable as this continues to develop? I don't know if you have an answer for that, but what else do you need from the district at this point?
To answer that question real briefly, I will just say that I think that having transportation, communication, and our communication department working with the school district on some sort of a regular communication with our drivers, as opposed to we do it for a while and then it kind of goes and falls by the wayside. So I know that our transportation and communication have said they'd like to figure out something to create a plan, because mind you, nothing's going to happen this next academic year.
Yeah.
So we're still going to have the traffic issues. So education is going to be the way to be successful
Maybe
for.
there's an opportunity for the city, for the student council to get engaged.
So.
Briefly adding on to that, Mr. Pickens does do a pretty well job of sending out videos and Schoology communication, things like that to students. Now, do they read and watch them? I don't know, but it's important that
You
they're
do.
there.
You
and-
do, right?
I mean, I try to. Like, especially when we have tighter connections and there's videos that they play where we're required to be in class. Those are good times we can show those videos, and hopefully drivers will see them or at least hear them in the back of their mind.
It's a good idea.
There's opportunity.
Awesome.
And then I guess with my final thing I'll say, as a school district, as you have been, be present, because I know that we may not all be in agreement on what the right approach is and all that, but we all have to be at the table and this and figure it out and that. And I think we're very close on a open house date. I think they're narrowing it down to a couple of them. It looks like it's the last week of September, first week of October, I think, are the dates they're working on there. They didn't want to mess up homecoming, so.
Nobody wants to mess up
Or the
homecoming.
parade, so that was one of the things they were working on. But I think that if some of you can show up to that open house and share your concerns, and there'll be opportunities to provide feedback in that. And I know that it's going to be something that the community has very strong opinions on, but we just can't do nothing anymore, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Mike, Christy, Aaron, thank you so much for coming here tonight and helping us understand the process and the plans going forward. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right. Next item on our agenda is an update on the update on the policy or the procedure around sale of donated items. Jane Huska. Thank you. I feel like it's night.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it is actually night, but I mean, it feels like
Feels
much
late.
darker.
Dark behind you. It's the dark curtains.
I got it when I got it.
Mr. Chair, board
Thank you.
members, Superintendent Berg, members of the community, thanks for having me here tonight. This is the first formal discussion in front of the board regarding a procedure for the resale of donated items. Unfortunately, we don't have a display, but it is attached in the agenda for all of you looking or listening, viewing online, so you can pull it up there. The premise of us making this procedure is due to some other incidences that happened here in the district earlier this year. So we came up with this procedure that we would follow as soon as it is adopted. Anything prior to that stays the old way. It would be just moving forward. And so what we did is we had some conversations within our district internally. We ran through some different scenarios to try to poke some holes in it and see how it held up. So currently in front of you, just some highlighted stuff. We went through that it would be a piece of equipment that would be donated, not any of the cash that we receive or money that is received, not our any items purchased with operating capital dollars or our general fund. It literally would be a piece of equipment that gets donated to the district. And that piece of donated equipment has to be in good working order with no repairs needed, right? We don't want to be taking on a piece of equipment where the district then has to put money into it to make it workable for our students or our departments to use for the next 5 years. So we'd like to ensure that as well. As the donated items come into the district, we would like to ensure that there is a paper trail, because as we go through this procedure, to be honest, in my lifetime here, I might see the tail end of this procedure, but really it's built for those people that are gonna be coming after us. Because, you know, when you get something, okay, let's say we keep it for 5 years, because that's a minimum. I'll probably be here in 5 years, but really it's probably more than likely it's gonna be the 10, 15 years. And I'm really hoping I'm not gonna be here at that time. Jason can be here, but I'm trying not to be here at that time. So really what we're trying to do is lay the foundation and make it as simple as possible for those people after us to follow the paper trail and make sure that they can find the documentation that they need for this. So we are asking that for this procedure, all the information gets entered into our Skyward system, which is an electronic system that we use in our district. It has all our financial information. We have a process set up for any gifts or donations that are made by anybody that goes through there. So then Lori Jensen can see it to bring it to the board, because they're all supposed to be approved at the board level. So this would just be an electronic paper trail for that. And then on the flip side of it, when the department is ready to sell a piece of equipment, that they would need to provide all of the documentations to ensure that they have gone through all the steps in order to get the net proceeds back. Because the process that we currently have, we sell our items through the State Department, and they do collect a nominal fee for whatever item that we sell. Yeah. So we're saying they would get the net proceeds. So if it's sold for $500, they're not going to get $500. It'll be $485. You know, whatever that may be. And at that time, we would give the money back to, if they meet all of the criteria, we follow everything, we give the money back to the department. That those funds back would have to be spent in the same fiscal year, because we don't want to be tracking, now we got $500 to roll over to the next year and another $5 or $485, whatever it may be. So that has to be spent in the same fiscal year. And that's kind of the premise of what we did and the rationale behind what we did.
Yeah, so and just to kind of bring this back, this is the first time that we've talked about kind of procedures more in a much orderly fashion. If you remember, this discussion originally came up as we did our budget realignment for this past school year. And then we went to work as administrators trying to come up with stuff, and we went down lots of rabbit holes of different things that could happen. And we came back, and I tried to find it. I can't remember. It might have been the work session in June, I think.
That sounds right.
And said, hey, what are you guys thinking? Can you guys give us some background? And that's where we said, okay, we got some feedback, put a monetary value, some other things on it. So we took that feedback and came up with this. So it was out of that, and kind of honed in on this idea that it was an item, not a money value, just because that goes different ways. And ultimately, our goal in putting this together was really to try to balance the ability of programs to recoup some of the value of an item that was donated, while making it manageable for our schools and our finance department. And what is that amount of money that makes it worthwhile? You know, what is the types of how much people power we put into this, that sort of thing. So that was the other part that kind of came out of putting this together.
Yeah, and just a little history on the 500. To be honest, I started out with 5,000 because
yeah, I said that wasn't going to work, so we went lower after that.
The rationale for it, just so you know my craziness, actually ties to our fixed asset policy that we have, right? So our current fixed asset policy is that we track items over $5,000, because under that we don't track. And so it was a starting point. It made sense to me, because this is what we currently do, because we don't track like any, you know, something that costs $250. We don't track that, you know, because when you're looking at $100 million budget and you're looking at $250, I mean, I'm sorry, but we have bigger fish to fry. So, Mr. Berg,
It was like playing The Price is Right. We started at 1,000. I'm sorry, at 5,000. We went to 1,000, and then we finally, and we pulled Dan Miller into it too, because Dan is the one right now who is the online eBay person. So it goes into his hands in terms of running it through that, all that other stuff. So between kind of the three of us, we felt like this was that amount of money kind of made the juice worth the squeeze for everybody, right? It's not perfect, but trying to take into the amount of time, and then, what is that? Because you could nickel and dime this thing to death. But then again, on the higher end of things, what potentially is something that donated that's going to have $1,000 worth of value at the end, and it's like, well, there's not. I mean, if we use something, right, it may not. So that was kind of how we came up with that piece. So
Okay.
Could you just touch on the requirement around having to be used on a regular basis by the program for a minimum of 5 years? I guess, let's say in the instance of the van, if it was used for 3 years, is there a reason that we require that the department has to use it for 5 years before it would be eligible to be sold for proceeds?
Yeah, I can answer that because we don't want to become a warehouse. I mean, the reality is that schools are awesome, and people are awesome at donating things to schools, and a lot of times people take something and they're like, this is really great, and use it for a little bit. We want people to be mindful of the things that they're accepting and use it. Now, again, right, you don't know you're going to be using it for an X amount of time, but I think if we thought 5 years was something that made a lot of sense, because if we take something in and we really want it, then we're going to find a use for that. I mean, I can use the example of the storeroom, which is now the jungle here at the high school. When we cleared that thing out, when we went in there, it was unbelievable, the stuff that we had taken. And some of it, because I was administrator at the time, we had just taken it in, a year later, and it ends up sitting there. And that, again, and part of this, we're not going to be able to track this. That's the reality of it. I mean, we're going to have to rely on people to be honest about it and not just take things and store it on a shelf someplace, So, I mean, these are our guidelines, and a lot of this stuff is people, we're going to have to trust our people to follow through with these things, because we have no way of doing this.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was more of an intent that if you take something in, we want you to use it. And we get things can change and stuff like that, but this should be something that we really, really want, and not something we take in for a year or two, we figure out that it's not worthwhile, and then come and say we need to get rid of it.
Okay.
We've been on that end of that as well.
Okay, thanks.
So that was another arbitrary number.
Yeah. The van, right? Because some of this was born out of those discussions, right? From our band friends that
That's the candles.
that came, and I think I was your friend at the time.
You're always our friend.
Right? So the van, just for everybody's, right, the van was not a good idea, right? Not a good idea on the van, and I was like, we don't need a van, but we got a van. So I think the logic behind that completely makes sense to me. I think creating a policy, just to create a policy is not something that we want to do here. What we want to do is look at what are we trying to solve. And during those original discussions, we have the van issue. I think this solves that, certainly from my perspective. The other concept was our plethora of instruments that we have, and Jane, you and I had a conversation about this. The replay program, from a band perspective, we take in all these instruments. Individually, they're never going to add up to be $500, right? But we take those in and we make sure that they're workable for kids to use them. 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we might have to, phase out a handful of those instruments. It's never going to hit the threshold here. We still have to get rid of them. So if we do, and the sale of those, takes in $400, the logic that we want to create is, so let's turn around and put that $400 right back into that program, so we can still ensure that we have more instruments to put more kids in that program. This doesn't solve that because it sets the threshold too high based on the way it's defined. And maybe we can change that, maybe we can't. Maybe we could have some additional discussion behind, there are going to be exceptions to everything. What could that look like? Or are we completely set with what's really listed? I don't know.
Well, I think it's an ongoing discussion. I think the only thing that I would have us think about is this process needs to apply to all of our
Everybody.
organizations.
Yep.
And so I understand the point of view that you're bringing up, but one of the conversations we had into prior to you joining us at, I think it was June, right? Is potentially all of our different organizations gathering things together to get to whatever threshold it is. If it's $300, I mean, you always have that possibility, and what does that look like if people now see all that to do that? And I think from our standpoint, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter. The question is, can we manage it, right? If it is a program, you can probably manage that. But if you cascade that through all of our different programs we have, that's where I think it becomes, what can you set so that you can manage through all of that? And the reason we're bringing this forward is so we can have a conversation and see what people, thoughts are, those conversations can be, and we can go back and take a look and answer more questions and things like that. I mean, ultimately, the policy is 704. This is a procedure to that. It can change at any point in time.
I think
that's
it would
why
be,
we would prefer, to be honest with you, a policy,
Yeah.
because then we can
Yeah.
be much more, responsive to whatever may happen.
I think, at least for me, one of the things that would be really good is to look at what's the list of the donated items. That might be, I think, is visible to the board at some point. I didn't get a chance to study it, but how many are we talking about within a school year, and how many would fall within this category?
Yeah, and it would fall when they're sold, so that
Yeah.
would be the key. So it'd be
Yeah.
hard to tell, and I don't know. I mean, we could.
Well, I think a good question to start is, I will have to look to see if even those band instruments that were donated even came to the board. So I think that's even a starting point, right? There are a
Agreed.
lot of things, and it's just not that program.
Right.
There are
No,
a
I
lot
agree.
of things that get donated that unfortunately don't come before the board.
Yeah.
So I would even have to look to see if those even came before the board, because
Agreed.
I don't even think they did.
But even to that point, you can just take a look at the athletics and activities program. There's
Yeah.
a significant number of things that get donated.
Yes.
Now,
And all the PTs.
yeah. So again, so if you just focus on items, that slices that a little bit, right?
does.
So you narrow that down, and then the question would be, things are new. The question would be, what potentially would have that right now $500 with a value at resale in 5 years? I suppose we could take a little bit of a look. I'm not.
Well, the thing is
It's probably not a lot.
But
Yeah.
you know what school districts are great for? Using them way past their useful
It's true.
life. So, I couldn't tell you exactly how many items would be left on that, because I would say, school districts are just notorious for using items until they can't be used anymore.
Can we, if you give us a couple weeks, because
Yeah.
can we take a look and maybe just see if we can find some examples of stuff that were donated? Again, it would have to be in the board and packet and stuff like that between you and Lori.
What-
No. Well, I'm not talking, I'm talking in general. I'm not
Yeah.
talking abandoned. So I'm talking about things that have been donated things that have come through that have donated, and then maybe see. How about we do this?
Yeah.
We'll take a look. Can't give to you the timeline right now.
Well, I'm gonna, just off the cuff, I'm gonna say 99.9% of the stuff that comes through is monetary.
Great.
Items are that have been submitted, that
Yeah.
we're aware of.
I've looked at donated items. It's usually a good chunk of money from a PTP
Yeah,
that
yeah.
paid
Or
for
something
something that
specific.
happened.
Yep,
Yeah, it's
yep.
usually
Yeah.
something-
Booster Club, right? We
Yeah.
know that from a Booster
I've seen
Club
it.
view, right? We don't purchase anything.
Yep, yep.
Booster
Right.
Clubs don't purchase, right? So it is monetary.
Yeah.
That kind of takes all of that off the table. There
Yep.
are exceptions to that. And I think those are the things we're really talking about. It would probably give us an opportunity to make sure the flow of what's donated and how it is donated is done appropriately. So it is trackable if that's what we need, whether it's an instrument or a piece of any other equipment. So yeah, that would be worthy to look at.
So we'll dig in and see if we can hone in on some.
It might change
items.
donation processes for some
Absolutely.
organizations, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like everything, we
Yeah.
have the processes, we just need to make sure everybody follows them.
Correct.
So like the $1 Million Man,
You know?
we have the technology.
Well, it's hard too, I mean, because, something comes into a classroom or a building and, people just go around and they just go and want to use stuff. But
I don't know if there's other questions from the group. I think overall, though, I know Sue asked the question about, balancing, or, getting the attention, solving the right problems, right? And I think, I don't know if we've created new problems, but I know that this has been a difficult one to balance the interests. It's been a good conversation. I think, that at the end of the day, from what I was concerned when this first came to the board was the intent. And there's the intent of what was the donated item to benefit a program. And the concern was, well, then it got absorbed into the monolith, right? And I get that. And there was two different ways that I think were, you could have said all donated items just go back to the program, or you could have said all donated items come back into the general fund. I think both of those are legitimate. But I think the question we were asked to solve was, what's the intent of that money, and are we honoring the intent of the donation? I think you've done a really nice job of balancing. No one wants to kill you, Jane, with paperwork about
That's right.
donations for $50 items. Nobody wants to do that,
No.
and I think it's unreasonable to have expected that. And if that, so I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I think you've done the job of honoring the intent. Finding what's the issue we're trying to solve without really probably creating new ones. It may offset some different processes for different organizations, but I also just appreciate if something's donated to the district, we want to make sure it's in good working order. Because if
We get
the
a lot of
district
stuff
is
that
expected
isn't.
to spend capital money
Yes.
improving something
Yep.
that was donated, then something else is lost in that intent too, right? So anyway, I appreciate all of that.
Yeah.
So we'll do, I'm sorry to interrupt, we will do a little bit more digging. It might be a few Friday notes till we get there, but we will.
Okay.
And I appreciate your transparency in giving us this, Jane, because I know when it was first brought up for discussion, it was like, oh my gosh, how do we start doing this? And, it is a lot of work, and I just appreciate everybody who's worked on it, the time and effort, because it makes a big difference to organizations and knowing what the process is now. I think it's gonna make a big difference, and it's gonna eliminate any confusion, which I think is huge. It's, we've got it in writing. So thank you for your time and, like I said, your transparency and getting this and your money debate and, all that good stuff. But it is greatly
We
appreciated.
did have a process before, we just put it all back into the general fund, that was the process.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, honestly,
No, it's
'cause
true.
we were
It's
joking,
true.
Jane's like, well, I said, we
Yeah.
gotta work with, the previous people, what was the process? I was like, well, the process was to put it back in the general fund,
Yeah.
that's the process we had. So-
But you're changing the process
Yeah,
and
no, I
working,
know,
with-
yeah.
and that is greatly appreciated on many fronts.
All right, thank you, Jane.
Thanks.
Our next item is an update from the Finance and Long Range Planning Committee. Member Carrero?
Yes. So as a finance committee, we met last Thursday. We talked about two big things. Well, one I'm just gonna hit briefly on. It was about the Apple products in our iPads and stuff. And we're looking at, is there an opportunity for us if Apple has a new product in September? There could be an opportunity for us to do something different with that. But again, until we know a little bit more on that, there's not much of a discussion on that. But Andrew's doing a very good job on that right now, keeping us in the loop. The bigger thing we were talking about back in, this summer we met with Teamworks Dennis, and he actually showed us a projection model of how we can look at a budget and see everything that's in a working budget. Well, come to find out that program really wasn't working the way it should be. So Jane took the initiative and got a hold of Ehlers, which is our financial advisor group, and they have a pretty cool tool out there, Ehlers Projection Model it's called. And it lays out everything. So if we have a budget, I'll throw numbers out, and these are fictitious numbers, I'm gonna be very clear on that, of a budget of $50 million, and we know that we have a negotiations coming up for one group. We can build in their percentages on that so we can see what we can afford as a budget. If we have a $50 million budget, we want to keep it in that. What do we do? If our head count changes within our teachers or administration like that, reduce or increase, we can put that in the formula. There's a lot of wild cards, especially when you look at the enrollment part with TeamWorks and how Eller does that. So we have 2 meetings scheduled, August 17th and the 25th, actually build parameters on this. And a lot of the parameters around enrollment, fund balance, contract settlements, staffing, utilities, levies, et cetera, et cetera. This will actually, we put numbers in it, and it'll help us determine financially what our next plan of action can be. And you can plan that out for X amount of years. Pretty cool tool. Jane has done great work on that. Now it's up to us as a finance committee to put some numbers in there, and then Jason will bring it back to the board with a couple summaries. But it would be nice, I think, to the board to actually see that entire tool, because it is amazing when you put different numbers or percentages in that of how it can change everything. Again, a lot of school districts do not use this, which I'm amazed. I think it's in the business world, this is what we look at in a daily spreadsheet, to be honest with you. So I think it's really going to help us in the long run as a district to determine, do we need to go out for a levy? Do we need to do this? Can we afford doing this? Et cetera, et cetera. So again, August 17th and 25th, we're going to have meetings with the administration, Jacqueline and I, at 7 a.m. in the morning to kind of build those parameters. So hopefully our next, I would assume, work session, we would have something a little bit.
Yeah, our intent was, to Steve's point, it's pretty robust, and there's lots of different things you can put in there, so we got to hammer out some things. We can kind of show you, but it'd be too easy, I think, if we were all sitting around saying, hey, put that in there, put that in there, put that in there, because you could do that. I mean, you really could sit down, and there's endless possibilities. So our thought was, after meeting, was to bring 3, 4, 5 different scenarios back to the board and say, if our enrollment does this, if we do this, and kind of see what that impact is out, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and bring that to the September work session.
And we can always change the parameters if we come back and say, you know what, guys, I feel you low-balled it or high-balled it. Let's throw X at it. We can take that back to Jane, and she can put it in and figure that right out for us. So it's a fantastic tool.
Do you guys have a timeline, Steve, on when you expect to bring a recommendation to the board around a potential operating levy and a budget alignment? So options and for consideration, that's one of the things as part of my community engagement discussion is those decisions, those recommendations have to come to the board first. The decision has to be made so that can inform then what those strategies are. And there is definitely a sense of urgency within our district, our administrative partners, and I think our stakeholders to know what we're going to do and be able to inform that soon.
Well, I think after we meet on the 17th and 25th, and then we determine what Jason's going to bring back to the board in September, that's going to be our starting point to really have that discussion on that. So again, to move forward with that, we're all going to have to agree on it as a board. So a goal would be September. Is that realistic? I don't know.
Yeah, our thought, just kicking around with us, is to get some initial feedback in September, take that back, and then bring some targets in October.
Okay.
With the targets with not only what would we potentially need to realign,
right,
but also, because we did too, and Steve's probably going to get to this, but we also looked at some preliminary levy options as well, and what those would look like. And I think part of the thing that we're going to talk about on the 17th and the 25th is, because then you plug that in there too. What does this do, and what does that do? And then, I'm still in this thunder.
No, it's perfect. I just don't want people to panic when taxpayers hear levy.
Yeah.
We're not saying that's what's going to happen. I think what we're looking at, this sheet is going to help us determine if we go down that path. But prior to that, what else can we do up until that point where we pull the trigger on a levy? If we do have to make cuts, where do we make cuts? And again, this instrument will really help us determine that. I felt really comfortable coming out of there. Depending again, do we have to have a levy? Have no idea. Do we have to make cuts? Have no idea until we really sit down and dive into this.
okay.
Does this
Oh, no, I was just gonna ask a clarifying question. So you guys will bring your recommendations. You will have discussed what options you think might be best for us to consider.
Correct.
Or have
Yep.
had that
Yep.
discussion
Yep.
first. Okay, that's helpful.
And is this software that we need to purchase or just have access to, or,
We had to pay Ellers to do this.
okay, and so this is just a one-time fee?
So they build it, there's a fee for them building it, and then they do
Okay.
some updates and things like that, so.
Okay, and then do we always have access to this, paying that one-time fee?
Well, we're gonna wanna,
Or is this
we're gonna wanna
ongoing?
connect with them so that they can continue to put updates in it, cause you got, it's all
Okay.
based off the state formulas and all those different things, and so those change yearly, so
Yeah.
there'll be an ongoing piece to this, and we haven't quite, cause we're still working, and I know on Friday Notes, we've talked a little bit about some of the work we're doing with Teamworks around enrollment.
Yep.
And that's another thing that'll be somewhat ongoing, because they have the ability to update that as new developments come online. They can continue to check things, so there will be a small price to that, but to be honest with you, to give us the ability to dig deeper into both of those things,
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's worth the investment,
Yeah.
so.
If you could
Nice
see
tool
it,
to have.
it's really powerful, and I can't even imagine creating the calculations behind that, and I think that's where Teamworks kind of got, it didn't work as well, I will say.
Okay.
So, we're paying for something that's gonna work efficiently and effective, but remember, it depends on the data we put in.
Right.
You gotta put good data in and get good information on it. And the enrollment is, depending on which way we decide to go on it, that's a challenging part, to be honest.
Great.
But that's all I have.
I just think it's an important piece and of course, important piece of work that we need to get done this year. And so
Yep.
I'm really excited to see the progress on it. I think we've, you know, Hannah and I, since we've joined it, I think as we've worked through different other decisions on the board over the past year and a half, that level of transparency and visualization, I think ultimately this is just important work for us, particularly as we go forward in the next couple of years to make hopefully better informed decisions and ultimately just better decisions all the way around. So I really appreciate the work that's going into this, and thank you for meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So Hannah, back to your question, I think, right, so we can bring kind of some scenarios to the board in September, and I think from an administrative standpoint, based on what people are comfortable after that in terms of what we put in it, I think we have to have a really good discussion. We're gonna have to do a realignment in some way, shape, or form. We believe it's just gonna have to be done. But we're gonna have to have a discussion, you know, in October about what's the target, right? What is the target for that realignment?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think it's just helpful to know that the committee is intending to bring their recommendations forward. As Dennis described, the purpose of the committees is to do research and ultimately bring forth recommendations that save us time during
Yep.
work session.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
knowing that we're not starting with
Yep.
a blank slate with 6
Nope.
people, and that this small group has done that ahead of time to give us a leg up on that is gonna be really helpful, I think.
If there's no further questions or comments for Steve, we can move on to the next item, which is community engagement. Member Simmons.
Okay, and similar, just building right on that, so the Community Engagement Committee met in July, and during this meeting, if anyone would like to follow along, it's in your school board in our new shared drive. If you go to committees and community engagement, you can open the ISD 192 framework for community engagement. And so what we did during our meeting was we reviewed this. This was something that the Community Engagement Committee had started last year. Kyle and I, with the support of Chris, Lisa, and Sarah. And so this is an adaptation. What you're looking at is an adaptation of a couple of the key models that both Teamworks recommended and said that most schools are using, as well as another spectrum of community ownership that's commonly used. And so I just want to take a minute to kind of walk you through this, and know that you'll have time to do this too before our next work session. What we'll be using at that time, when we're actually bringing forward issues for discussion, is we'll be using phrases or terms in here. So the purpose of the framework is to build that consistency and understanding for the community and for us as a board. So we might say our recommendation is to consult the community during this phase of this issue, and here are some strategies that have worked well in the past, and here are things we think the board should consider. And so just take some time to look through that, and if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to field them. I think the example techniques row is really helpful to see, what does this look like in practice? And then thanks to our administrative partners, they actually added ISD 192 examples so that we could see where do we already have councils, where are we already collaborating with people in areas of expertise like Special Education Advisory Council. Where are we working to inform the public? Those are things like our truth and taxation hearings or our school board meetings and work sessions. So take a look at the framework. This is what we'll be using to guide the community engagement work. And as part of that, you can also take a look at the community engagement discussion guide. There's a template in there, and if you kind of want to see the start of one, we're not sharing this tonight around this topic, but you can open the template and just see this is what we will link for the board prior to work sessions. So you will be able to see what is the topic. Is there a need for community engagement, that it was either called for by the whole board or recommended by this committee? What is the community engagement goal? This is where we'll be linking right back to that framework. What is the time frame? So is this a phased? Is it going to have multiple components of community engagement? Who are the stakeholders? Remember, the stakeholders will vary by issue. So that's something that will change depending on the topic. What methods should be considered? Again, those are those techniques. So are we, depending on the recommendation and the goal, is it a focus group? Is it a listening session? Is it a series of those? Is it hiring a contractor? So examples in the past are things like school start times, and you guys have been through that too, school boundaries, those types of things. And then you'll see recommendation for work session. So ultimately we're bringing forward so that hopefully you can use these and review these prior to the work session, so you come in knowing where the committee stands. We also captured our minutes, and just want to ask too, I can send a template, but we did talk about all committees capturing minutes because there were some issues this year with not having documented discussions, and so I can provide a template, but just want to make sure that we all are still on the same page about that. So you can, if you're interested, you can review the minutes in that folder as well. The topics that we discussed, so coming from the minutes, included some of those that were identified as part of the governance work plan for the school board. So those 4 included the operating levy as that relates to the one that will expire in 2025, budget alignment, legislative priorities, and competency-based reporting framework. And so we spent the rest of our time during this meeting talking about the sequencing of those things. So again, we're not going to bring all 4 of these topics to the board during a single work session, but we prioritized those with the operating levy related to the decisions made by the board for that and budget alignment, to be able to start identifying community engagement strategies and work to occur as soon as possible. Really that will be ongoing, but our committee had, with the input of Andrew and Lisa, had said really between August and October having those decisions made, which sounds like it's right in line with what Jason's saying in terms of when they think they'll come back, so that following October we know what the plan is. So we'll meet again as a committee after those recommendations have come to the board. We're thinking probably after the September work session, so we have a better idea, and then hopefully we can bring some ideas to the board in October if we're at that point as a board. Timeline for legislative priorities. So we had identified that this would be sequenced after planning for operating levy related items and budget alignment, community engagement. The session runs February to May with preliminary discussions planned for the community engagement committee around this in January. As we found and talked about a little bit last year, the group really discussed how different school boards approach legislative priorities. So you might see schools publishing their 3 top priorities legislatively, and quite frankly, I said to the group, I read those and I go, well, duh, those are everybody's. Like, is it more of a checking a box to say that we have these, or is our committee and our board really focused on how can we increase advocacy and engage our community to support those? And Jason was really helpful this year. Kyla drafted emails that people could push and send out. So that's really our goal as a committee, and we'll be bringing that forward at that time for you all to discuss. But how do we not only identify those priorities, knowing what the bills are for this year and the potential impact it would have on our district, but ultimately, how can we further engage passionate people in our community to support our advocacy in that area? And finally, after that, that left our competency-based framework, competency-based reporting framework, which for the purposes of this work session, just wanted to touch in with the group on this topic. So this was something that we had talked a little bit about as it related to the presentation that Chris and Lisa and the instructional coaches did. It was really informative. I know we all gained a lot from that. And then I think the idea here was around community engagement, was around increasing awareness for parents, primarily around what the framework is and how it's used in classrooms. And so we wanted to check back in with the board during this work session. There are identified communication strategies already as part of the operational plan. So this is already something that we talked about during the retreat, and that's on administration's awareness as a goal of just helping parents understand this further. So we weren't sure if this was within the scope of the board of a separate community engagement topic, like something that we saw as a board or a district we should be doing something unique. So we'll give you that question to consider. That would help us.
On the topic of the competency-based stuff, I mean, I think that's a good question. I'm not sure if it's board engagement. I think as we saw when did we do that? March or April, that presentation? There's a lot of appetite for awareness, but it's not just awareness. It's also, how do I engage with this? I don't know if that's board work or if that's just administration work, and it's good work. Always the number one question is, what is this competency-based thing? Even my kid says he doesn't always understand what he's supposed to be doing.
Nope, and I think that's the point, right? That, to me, is best communicated kind of at the grassroots level. I mean, you can give broad frameworks of how they work and go together, but right, how's that communicated from staff members? How is it communicated from administrators in buildings? That's where the rubber meets the road, because it has the most impact, and that is part of the conversations of, as we get back into school and as we share what that learning design looks like from buildings and teacher perspective, to make sure that we do a very good job up front of doing that. And then I think the other thing too, to what we've discussed previously, right, is part of it is, how does it look when I go out and I look at Infinite Campus and things like that. And that's one of the big things that Chris has been working on, especially in our secondary buildings, of making that look more like people are used to. So I don't have to hit 42 different clicks to go get something. It pops up and I can see, where my learner's at and then what they're trending towards. Because again, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what people kind of look at. Where's my kid right now, and where are they projecting to be?
Well, and to that point too, I mean, the board level conversation is this driving the framework forward? Is this driving student performance? Is it contributing, right? And so that's the board level work around community engagement. This is work that's being invested in and supports the framework. So is it delivering the results ultimately that we're driving towards, right?
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the stuff that I think about.
No, it sounds in line with what we discussed as a committee. So are others on the same page? I see nodding. So we can look forward to just progress updates as we will have related to all of the things in the operational plan this year. And we'll take that off of our list as a committee then. So that is the summary of the Community Engagement Committee meeting and next steps.
If there's no other discussion on that, we can move on to the ISD 917 update.
Yes, I'm talking a lot. So excited to give an update on the 917 school board meeting. So as we talked about, hoping to have a stronger connection besides just including their minutes in our consent agenda, but really to be able to call out a few highlights for fellow board members. So they've met 2 times since I started in July. The first session, one of the interesting things that I think all board members will be happy to hear is that they're talking about the term. We're considering revising the term. So right now it runs July to June, which at my very first meeting, people called out that they were going to be up for re-election if they weren't elected, and their board appointed a new member. It would be 6 months before this person is joining. And so it sounded like the group at that time was in agreement that this is something to revisit, to potentially align with our cycles, January to December. So more to come on that. They also worked to revise their strategic plan in the last couple of years. So their superintendent, Dr. Favor, is really focused on community engagement as well. And so their strategic plan has been revised, really, I think, exciting and something that you can review if you'd like. Another thing that kind of goes along with that they brought up was related to Dr. Favor was unexpectedly indisposed for a while. And so they talked about as a board how at that time, because their structure does not have an assistant superintendent, how it was a little, there was some uncertainty. Who do we talk to? Who's interim? Who's the acting superintendent during this time? And so it was just something I thought was interesting because we're structured, we don't have an assistant either. So I already put this on Jason's radar that it probably would be helpful just for the board to know who he would designate in that time. For 917, they were talking about, do they need a formal policy? Can it be something just as simple as knowing who should be the contact and the acting superintendent? But so that was interesting. They have also updated their parent and student handbooks. So these are really detailed and I enjoyed looking through them. Take a look at those if you want. I think they're going to be really helpful resources. As far as a kind of another school-related issue coming into this year, so there's a wait list that is a priority for the district. They have about 100 paraprofessional positions open, and so similar to us and all other districts, right, they need to hire paraprofessionals. So they're working on some innovative things, like they're making a video to try and recruit paras, and so if and when that's done, I'd love to share it with you guys or send on anything. And finally, they're having back to school gatherings that we've been invited to. The one that's closest to us is at DCTC. It's on September 1st, and I can send you guys the times. They have little buckets of time that day. So anyone's welcome to attend those and join their back to school gatherings as they welcome back staff and different departments. So if you have any questions, let me know.
All right, thanks. Anything? All right, final item on the main agenda is the superintendent evaluation process. It's something the board does every year. I'm not sure if we're a little behind in getting it started, but I think we're probably about on the same timeline. I know you, me, and Melissa kind of managed this last year. I dug up the kind of the documents that we ended with. It's worked in the past, I guess. I'm just not sure if there's anything that I'll flip over real quick. I forwarded to each of you a quick rundown of what the evaluation process might look like. And then essentially it's a 360-degree survey of the superintendent. We survey the board members, we survey Jason's direct reports, other administrative leaders, and then I think last year we did 30% of the teachers and staff, each of the different bargaining units. We had Mary Ann run a randomized list and then sent them the email with an opportunity to complete that survey. That felt like a good process last year. I don't know if there's any comments on whether we should do something different. If not, the timing I recommend is, so I'm here tonight discussing the process for the survey and the timelining. If the 360-degree survey that I've provided to each of you looks about right, or if there's not anything to add, and even if so, if we have to add a few things, we can do that. But I would recommend administering that survey between the 15th and the 26th of August. And then between the 29th and September 2nd, we'd have a chance to kind of review the surveys, kind of the raw data, and compile notes.
Are you saying, to administer that to staff on August 15th? Is that what you said?
August 15th to the 26th.
I would wait until September. They're just going to be coming back for
Okay.
the school year, and they have enough stuff to do.
Yeah.
That's just me. But
You're a teacher. I appreciate that. I kind
So-
of thought about it, right?
I don't even know if a lot of them will be back on the 15th yet, so none of them are going to check their email until halfway
Yeah,
through
when
that.
did they come?
Yeah.
Actually, when did they come back?
29th.
The 29th.
There you
Okay,
go.
so yeah, bad idea.
Well,
We'll amend that.
they are waiting for my welcome back email, so they're probably checking that quite frequently.
Yes. Believe me. Believe me.
Seriously?
All right, so I'll expand this timeline out. What do you think is, like, how much time once school starts is like?
I would
another
wait
week?
until
Like, for a
the
deadline.
second week of, I'd give it,
Give them 2 weeks after
let's see,
school
we start
starts?
on Labor Day.
Like end of September,
I
last
would
week
go
in
third week of
September.
September, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'll amend the timeline here to extend that, and that pushes some of the rest of these items into October, which is fine. It was all arbitrary when I put this together. But anyway, after we have a time for board members to review and compile some notes, we'll pull together a preliminary results. A closed session would take place, I guess, probably in October, where we would present our review and have discussion with Jason about the findings of the 360 degree review process. And then I think then we come back to the business meeting in October and have a public reading of summary of that evaluation.
Yep.
Okay. Does anyone else want to be part of the process? I know Hannah and I had agreed to do it.
I would be
I'm not
happy.
looking at you for any good reason, Jackie.
I can certainly help it. When do you guys usually meet, or?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of meeting left. I think that we can do this
Just
mostly
this.
via
Yeah,
a couple
via
of
email
emails.
usually.
Oh,
But-
I'm happy to help.
But I think the meeting would take place, and it's not a quorum meeting, so we want to make sure that that's clear, right? So that we can have a discussion as an evaluation committee on, I guess, compiling this preliminary report. Okay, I'll add you, Rebecca. And that's kind of it. I don't think I had any other questions I needed to run past the board, but if there's any recommendations or concerns, let me know. All right, so that's the end of the main part of the agenda. We've got some policy discussion. I think Hannah, you lead that, or? who?
No.
Sue's the new person to lead it.
Sue or Mary Ann, you can.
So there's
I wasn't at the last policy meeting, so unfortunately I
there's
wasn't.
We,
there's 6 policies here
yes.
that are getting updated, right?
Yes, it was regular review. So we met July 28th and reviewed the policies that you see, so 205, 209, 210, 11, 12, and 14. Minor changes from the MSBA, nothing substantial. Most of them were slight verbiage changes, and it didn't change the intent of any of these policies. So we looked at those one by one, and they all looked appropriate. So, any questions?
I reviewed, I'm assuming others reviewed them in advance too. I mean, I took a look, yeah, it didn't look like anything out of the ordinary.
Thanks, Sue.
So,
That's the fastest policy discussion I think we've ever had.
you're welcome.
Sue's exceeding expectations.
Thank you.
already.
Thank you.
All right. The last item on our agenda before we go into closed session is an opportunity for public comment. I don't know if Mr. Mayor wanted to say anything or if the gentleman visiting or had comments. Yeah, come on down. I don't know if we had the cards out front, but I think just ask to state your name and city of residence.
Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Paul Bayless. I've been a resident of Farmington for 17 years. I have my family's here, actually. Both children live here and my grandchildren as well. I have two grandchildren, 2 granddaughters who go to Farmington High School. And one will be a senior this year, one will be a junior. On December 4th of 2021, a month after the Dakota County last survey of the intersection, my granddaughter was hit broadside at the intersection of 50 and Flagstaff. Totaled the car. She walked away with scratches and bruises, thank God. She looked both ways. She did not get a citation. Someone came out of the field and hit her at 50 miles an hour.
Whoa.
I drive that Highway 50 a lot, and I heard your comments regarding the speed limit. People drive a lot faster than 60 miles an hour. If the person that hit her would have been coming just straight west, she probably would be dead. So I leave that with you to paint a picture as I talk to you briefly about this. December 7th, 3 days after that, I had the pleasure to speak to Mayor Hoyt and the Farmington City Council. They have been very supportive of this process. Mayor Hoyt has been very available. And it's a privilege to talk to all of you today, because I feel this group, each individual here, has a lot of pressure they can apply to Dakota County. And Kyle, I appreciate you giving me the Heisman over there, because sitting back there listening to Dakota County discuss this, because I've had numerous conversations with Dakota County, the representatives here, as well as Mayor Hoyt. And I won't get into the long details of that, but I'm very passionate about this project. And I was probably ready to do a individual single seat wave up there when Steve talked to Dakota County about, is this a money issue? And I will tell you it's a money issue. When I asked about, in my numerous conversations with Dakota County, they said that a traffic signal would be $3 million, and the option that they were looking at would be $200,000, only $200,000. It's really difficult to see this, because I was also told that the solution, and I agree with, I believe it was Rebecca that said something's better than nothing. I do believe that that's true. And based on that, I wanted a traffic signal. For all the reasons, Steve, you brought up and mentioned, I think they were brilliant, quite honestly, is that there needs to be something done, because we have a lot of young drivers. We were fortunate in our family. My wife and I came upon the accident. We were called because my daughter and son-in-law were at work. No one should go through this. I don't know if you know of anybody who's been in an accident, whether it's here or elsewhere, but it's just really earth-shattering. So I leave this with you. You have a lot of power. I think one of you said, what can we do? You can do a lot. You can put a lot of pressure on Dakota County. This is not the mayor's issue as far as a kickback or pushback, I should say, or let's find a different option. And forgive me for being so bold, it's your responsibility. We put our kids in your hands. And I appreciate every one of you, because what I heard sitting up there was that you have a great concern about our children. And I appreciate that. I have a great concern about my grandkids. Forgive me. I ask you to step back tonight, step back tomorrow, talk amongst yourselves. Don't allow Dakota County to put a fix on this. You've got agriculture business that uses Flagstaff. You have teams, sports teams, parents from other schools coming to activities. You have your bus routes. You have people that need to go east on Flagstaff to go to downtown businesses in Farmington that need the business. I live off of Pilot Knob and 50. If this intersection does not need a stoplight, neither does that, and neither does Aiken. So I'll leave you with this. Someone is going to die at that intersection. Probability and statistics is going to dictate that. Don't let that traffic fatality, be that a kid from Farmington High School or an elderly person or somebody else, rest on your shoulders. You have a collective ability to push back on Dakota County. It is a money issue. They put their flag on the fact that they don't want to have to spend money or spend the least amount of money. And I know I've been told there's 342 intersections. How many have a high school with young drivers? Please, please, I implore you. No one should go through what we did. Your kids or anyone else. Stick together, be tough, and be tough on Dakota County. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is the close.
Coming out.
Oh,
You don't mind, only because member intent Good evening, Mr. Chair and members. Early part of November, we had, between myself and some of my peers, we had a lot of resident contact about issues that were happening within the Flagstaff and 50 intersection. I subsequently brought it up at one of our work sessions and said, let's start the conversations, right? Let's involve the county, it's a county road, knowing that that was gonna be the first piece of what has turned out to be a very in-depth and thoughtful conversation from many sides. We met with the county on the 23rd of November. Between our work session and that meeting on the 23rd is when they started to do some of their preliminary traffic study, which was on top of previous studies that had been done. So when they referenced the most recent being in November, that's what it was in response to, was to formulate data to bring it to the November 23rd meeting, which was Commissioner Slavic, myself, both Aaron and Christine, and then Assistant City Engineer Matt DeCur. I believe Administrator Gorski was, or Administrator McKnight was there at the time. I don't recall total of people that were there, but nuts and bolts, as we got out of that conversation, was that we needed to do something. Everyone in the room agreed that the intersection warranted action. What that answer was going to have to come out of data, analytics, something, right? What it couldn't come out of was emotion. Unfortunately, a little over 13, 14 days later or so, Paul's granddaughter was involved in the accident. That was the most recent of the 9 in the last 3 years that were given to us as statistical data, 5 of which were southbound Flagstaff, turning to east County Road 50, or Highway 50. And we knew that this conversation had come up before. We knew that whether it was school initiated or district initiated or city initiated, the conversation had come up in the past and nothing had been done. The building's been here since '09. Development is starting to occur at a much faster rate than even what our 2040 comp plan suggests. So we needed to get out in front of it. We know capital improvement plans, we know timelines, we know that these processes can take several years in most cases, and from the council's perspective, that's not fast enough. But we do rely, as we all as electeds rely on our staff, right? Our staff they're the professionals, they're the subject matter experts. We rely on them to bring us the data to formulate the most educated decision that we can make. So that's what we've asked the county to do, and they've brought forward a lot of good data. My emotional side, and my peers have commented this as well, is what about a roundabout? What about a stoplight, right? Member Carrera brought that point up. But to Member Simmons' point, sometimes the data doesn't back up the emotional decision. I believe that a stoplight is what's best, but the data says otherwise. The data says that there are more incidences per. Again, I'm not an engineer. My peers are not engineers. We rely on staff to tell us what the data says and make a good decision based on that. We have a lot of challenges with this intersection. And a lot of this information has come to light because we have become subject matter experts in the last 6 or 7 months. The question was asked about the turn lane and the queue. So turning south on Flagstaff to westbound 50 before you hit the U-turn. From the current turn lane to the end of from the current turn lane southbound Flagstaff turning east on 50 to the new U-turn proposed location, according to GIS, is 781 feet. When you look at the county's plan and how much they're taking out of that intersection, it's roughly 65 to 70 feet. That turn lane is 281 feet. I know this because we've researched it. We've taken information, we've dug into it to try and better understand. It's not a perfect solution. It may not be the best solution long term, but it is a very good solution given the need that exists for safety, the measure by which we can do something now and put in place very quickly. But going back in November, when my peers and I discussed Flagstaff in this intersection, we also recognized that we had to put more time and effort into Flagstaff itself. Not just 200th Street, not just 195th and the intersections that are there, but we have a growing population, we have high need for the land that's in this community. We have a lot of development that's landing on city staff's plate every single day. So we are committing dollars to study Flagstaff and look at the long-term, not just transportation needs, but future zoning, all the things. This solution is short-term. We know we're going to end up with something bigger. Can we collaboratively work together to push on the county to ask for the bigger and better solution? You're right, we absolutely could. But do we know enough, and do we have enough information that backs our position in asking for that decision? Right now, we don't. And we have to rely on staff and the information that they've put forth and put our emotion aside and say, this solution fills a need. I have a 15-year-old, gonna be sophomore driver. We've had the conversation. You're not going that way. I can teach you how to make U-turns. I can talk about clearances and the things. I'm an adult that drives a 1-ton heavy-duty diesel pickup, and I drop her off at school in the morning, and I approach that intersection, and I'm in a big, safe, bulky truck. I look left, I'm clear. I look right, I'm clear. Nope, there's a vehicle in the turn signal. I'm not turning left. I'm gonna go right, and I'm gonna make that U-turn and head eastbound on 50. But I'm not a new driver. I'm not 16. I don't have a whole lot of hours of experience. So Mr. Ballas's point is correct. Take some time and step back, engage others in the community, ask them to get more involved with their students, their drivers. There is a multifaceted approach here. We do have to educate our drivers. We do have to make an improvement to the intersection. We do have to look at some other alternatives, and some of them may include, in the short term, some changing of times of start. It's unfortunate, but with challenge comes change. We have to make some of those changes right now. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the right answers. But I can tell you that the city council has engaged the county to a point at which we feel that the county's proposal is sufficient for the short term. And we know that as we get through long-term planning of Flagstaff, we're gonna have to look at something bigger, and that most likely is going to end up being a stoplight or a roundabout. But right now, what we're being given is not supportive or indicative that that's the move to make. So we do support their proposed change. There's going to be some more work with that, a lot more communication, and there's gonna be some uncomfortability with it as well, but we all agree that safety is number one. We want to do something to reduce the number of incidences, even if it is just by one. Cost share wise, the county is taking on this project in its totality, approximately $200,000 to $300,000. This is not an 85-15 cost share. If we look into future projects, yes, there will be cost share, and that'll be a part of the project, but it's not a determining factor in the project from the city's perspective. So,
Thank you.
absolutely, thank you.
Can I ask Josh a question?
Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You got my number.
Yep.
All right. That's the end of our public agenda pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.03 for labor negotiation strategy. The board is going to move into closed session. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Colette Doyle, second by Carrero. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are now in closed session.
Well, yeah, so we need to move.
We'll move into the other.
So bring your chair, because there's no chairs over there. So if you want a chair, you got.